theology, or more strictly we call fundamental theology. I want to use the word foundational theology for several reasons. First, sometimes the word fundamentalism or fundamental can also be would connote something about very conservative theology. This is not the meaning of fundamental in this course. Fundamental means basically foundational. What are the foundational ideas or processes or realities that we have to take up as a kind of a groundwork for our theologizing? It's called foundational because on this matters, on the themes that we are discussing in this class, will depend mostly the other branches of theology, which we would call eventually later on a systematic theology. So when we talk about foundational theology or fundamental theology, we're talking about those basic elements in any kind of a theology. And then, of course, we talk about method. How do you go about doing that kind of theology? So if you're starting to, or if you want to start doing theology or reflecting on theology, then you would have to be grounded on the principles that we will be taking up in this part. So foundational theology. Okay, our chapter 4, the first chapter in part 2, will be talking about method. And method is very crucial. As a matter of fact, it is the, what do you call this? It is what we assume as the prerequisite for any kind of theologizing. You have to have a method and you have to know the method that you are using. In olden days or in the years past when they were teaching theology, they were not so keen on talking about method because there was only one method. And one method is what the teacher teaches you. And according to the what we call the manual theology kind of theologizing, there was only one method, and that is the method of the church. Whatever the church teaches, everybody should follow it. In other words, there was a uniform kind of a method. So uniform that you cannot really get away from it. You have to follow it almost very religiously, because if you don't follow it, then you can get lost, or you may not be able to understand what actually we are talking about. So in nowadays, when we start talking about fundamental theology, it is important that we know the method. And the thing is, once you know the method that you are using in doing theology, then you can practically do you can talk about any aspects of Christianity, any aspect of religion, any aspect of theology, but you will be able to analyze and perhaps develop that particular understanding of a particular theme because you would have a method. And when you have a method, things get easier because you look at things from a particular perspective. And when you look at the thing from a particular perspective, it is granted that it is something that is yours, that you favor, that you like. But at the same time, you're able to compare your methodology with other methodologies. And then that is when the dialogue comes in. If you are also aware of the method that let's say, the person you are talking to is using, then you would understand how to appreciate his ideas, and you would know how to interject maybe your disagreement with that person, especially on the level of method. So you may not disagree in terms of the content itself, but you can easily disagree on the method itself. It depends on how you are going to tackle this. All right, but very implicitly in what we have taken up so far, especially in the history of theology, we already came face to face with different methods. So the history of theology, in a way, has shown us that theology, as a rational reflection on faith, has developed in many different ways. A circle, a triangle, a square, a tree, organic kind of a methodology. There are many different ways of approaching theology. And knowing the approach that you take in doing theology is very decisive. It's very decisive. Now, throughout the history of theology, we have noticed that there have been three constant elements in these varied theological forms. Three constant elements. You find them almost in all of the different ways of doing theology. One is the element of faith, since theology is articulation of a faith experience, then necessarily we will be talking about faith. But again, faith is not just what they call is considered as faith with which you believe, which is what is called the fides qua, the faith with which you believe, but also faith meaning the content of your faith, what you believe. That is generally what we understand by faith. So faith actually has two senses: the faith with which you believe, that conviction, but also the content of your faith. That's why we speak of it as faith articulations or the teachings of the church. That's part of what we call the faith. Okay, or what we find in the Bible is a part of the what we call in general the faith. So that is one constant element. The second element is always the human subject. In other words, the one who is doing the theologizing, or the one for whom theologizing is being done. Like, for example, me, I'm theologizing on, let's say, the incarnation. So I am the human subject doing the theologizing. But at the same time, if I am a teacher, you are also the human subject that I am going to be talking to, may addressing to, whatever I am going to explain. So in theology, we just do not disregard the human subject, either as the person speaking or the person to whom, or the persons to whom we are speaking, or the addressee. So me, when I try to articulate, I have my own ways of articulation. I have chosen a particular language with which to articulate my understanding of, let's say, the mystery of God. So I have my own sociocultural context. I have my own philosophical context, philosophical background. Philosophy here is understood in a very general way. In other words, your perspective in life, general perspective in life. So those are important elements in the context that we need to take into consideration when we are talking about theology. In other words, it is not the context of the one or the faith that we are studying for now. We will study that too. But I'm talking here about the context of the person doing the theologizing. In other words, the subject. So faith, subject, those are the two constant elements. And the third one is that there was always a consistent urge or consistent drive to make theology do two things: to reflect faithfully the church's experience since the time of Jesus of Nazareth. And that's why we always say to have faith, because this is a lot of tradition that we have inherited from the past and to which we are asked to give an assent or to make an act of faith on. So we need to reflect faithfully the church's tradition. But at the same time, we need to be responsive to our existential concerns and issues. In other words, reflecting faithfully the church's faith experience, that's the first element. We're talking about the faith we have received from the church. But being responsive to existential concerns and issues is about the subject. How is it relevant to me? How is it relevant to the people to whom I am talking, the people I am teaching? How is it relevant to them? If it is not relevant to them, we can have a beautiful reflection on the Bible. We can have a beautiful reflection on the conciliar statements of the church, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't have meaning. So therefore, we are missing something here. So here, the third element, I would like you to understand this as the effort on the part of the theologians to always weigh the two in a balance. On the one hand, tradition, on the other hand, our human predicament, our human, what do you call this, context, the context now. So it's always a matter of weighing them down. You cannot say too much in favor of one or the other. Otherwise, you don't create the balance. And if you don't create the balance, somehow or other, there's something that's going to be missing there. Okay, so these are the three constant elements in this varied theological forms. We are still in the introduction, huh? Okay. Now, just to give you a kind of a purview of a preview of what we're going to be taking up, the faith in its articulations or the expressions or the object or content of theologizing, we will take up in chapter 6. So that's still away. The matter on the human subject, we will take up in chapter 5. Shortly after this chapter on method, we will take up the human subject. In other words, we need to understand ourselves, where we're coming from, what is it that is within our purview of understanding, what is the language that we use, or what is the level of our understanding, let's say, of first human reality, second about maybe things of God, etc. So that will be in chapter 5. And of course, the consistent urge to make theology reflect faithfully and be responsive to existential concerns is what is taken up in method in theology. But this method in theology is something that we are going to be applying as we go through. I have chosen a picture there to remind us that we, in order for something to grow above the ground, it has to have good roots. And if we are rooted in our experience, in our faith experience, the tradition that we have, the deeper we are rooted in our faith experience, the better we are able to grow and respond to above the ground, respond to our own situation. So that is what we are taking up here in chapter 4, Method in Theology. Now, so in chapter 4, I have divided the chapter into 3 sections. The first one is the movement or the move from the transition from apologetical theology to fundamental theology. That will be the topic for today. Tomorrow, we will take up 4.2, the methodology of see, judge, and act. Some of you are already familiar with this. We will just go through it and try to update it according to what Father Danny Pilario has written in his article. We will take that up tomorrow. And then next Monday, we will take up the post-colonial liberative methodology, which is basically the general framework or the general methodology that we will be using in this course. So this is the methodology that we will be using. It's not, it may sound very, very, what do you call this, very highfalutin, or maybe so, what do you call this, so abstract, but it is really not very abstract. It's quite simple. All right. So that is what we are going to take up in chapter 4. Now, before I continue, would there be some questions? Let me ask you, would there be some questions so far? The process that we are following, from the past, I think it's always good to connect what we have learned from the past to what we are going to be taking up today. Are things clear? Do you have some questions? Questions? All right. I will, what do you call this? Off and on, I will try to get your, what do you call this? Your questions before I go on to the next section. It is important that you ask questions, remember, because it is also graded. 10 points will come from the
Yes, my father, I have a question.
Tranvin. Yes. What is your question?
Yes, father. Uh, in the previous chapter, as she marked, she
Said
one of
Mark.
the authors said that
Said
doing
Mark.
theology in our yeah in yes doing theology in our local community and in our context, meaning to say is we contextualize the theology in our daily life. So that is very, I think, somehow very easy for the Catholics. So how can we do it to the one who is not Christians or is not Catholic?
Well, if if you are not Catholic, then I don't know what interest you have for doing theology. So you may not be interested in doing theology. But you are, if you are, what do you call it, a Catholic, then you should have an interest in learning about theology, in contextualizing your theology, because that is how you make sense of theology in your own life. Because you can study theology as a kind of a speculative academic work. So kind of history, it doesn't have anything to do with me. But if you want to make use of theology in your own life, you will need to put it in your own context, and you will have to ask theology to address your concerns today, or the issues and the questions that you raise. If you don't raise any questions, if you don't raise any problems, then I will be the one to raise some problems for you if I know your context. Okay. If you are in Vietnam, for example, okay, you're talking about Vietnam, the context is, maybe it's not a Catholic context, but still there are some of you who are Catholics, so therefore it's going to make a difference to you to study theology, so that you'll be able to understand what is it that you believe, and how are you going to express what you believe in a way that will be understandable not only by you, but understandable by people to whom you talk. If you want to convert some people to Christianity, you have to be able to know how to do it. If you want to deepen the faith of your fellow Christians or fellow Catholics, then you will have to know more about your own faith, articulate more about your own faith, try to put it in the language that they will be able to understand. Not just translating it, but be able to understand using examples that they are able to understand, so that there is a correlation between their experience and what we speak of as the teachings of the church or the teachings in Christianity. Okay? Tran, okay? All right. Other questions?
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome.
Father, I have some
Archie.
question.
Yes.
Um, a while ago, you presented to us that some of the main factor of doing theologizing. The first one is the presence of faith. The second
Yep.
one is the subject, the one who does theologizing or to whom it is made for. And the third one is the relevance, the present situation, and also the our connectedness to the
Yeah.
text and
That's
to
the balancing act. Okay.
the balancing act.
Yes.
My question actually, Father, is goes like this: how does theologizing started, or how does the process really started? It is really like on the point of view of the theologian. Does he just decided to start it, or does he undergone discernment on what to do, or is it like enlightenment of the Holy Spirit? I'm not so sure, Father.
Well, it all started out with Jesus Christ, with God. Okay. When we talk about theologizing, we're talking about something that is very, very crucial. And the very crucial one is Jesus Christ. That is sometimes the difficulty that we would find, I will show you later about apologetic theology. Sometimes we do theology almost in the air without connecting it to Jesus. But in fact, any good theologian has to start with what we have received about Jesus. It means what the Bible says about Jesus. But beyond what the Bible says about Jesus is that experience of which the books, biblical books, are talking. So, in other words, what was that experience? Now, that is something that is normally the starting point of any theology. Or if you can extend it further, if you just do not want to focus on Christ, you can go all the way back to the very early faith. You can talk about the creation, or you can talk about God, the whole idea of God. Why is God important for us? Somehow or other, it's important for God. If you are going to talk about things that pertain to God, you must think God is important. Why is God important? It's up to you to answer that question. Why is he important to you? If it's not important to you, then go study engineering, or study music, or study something else. Okay. But if God is important to you, then you can answer. God is important to me because I would like to know more about myself. Okay. God will be the way by which you will come to understand yourself. Or God is important to me because I would like to understand my dreams about this, about that. Or I'd like to be able to understand my dream about becoming a sister or becoming a priest. So that question about God is very important. Why? It's a life, or the future of my life. It has something to do with it. So it doesn't start in the mind of the what do you call this? In the mind of the the theologian. It starts in a given fact, a given event, a given reality. And for us Christians, that given reality is the Jesus event. I always speak of it as the Jesus event, because more than just the Bible, the books in the Bible, which describe the Jesus event, is the Jesus event itself. We're trying to grapple with what happened at the time of Jesus. But again, when we look at what happened at the time of Jesus, we have to be very careful that we have our own eyeglasses already. We have our own lens with which we look at what happened on Jesus, which is, a 20th century lens already. But how about the early gospel writers? They have their own lens, which was during the time of Jesus. But even that is not even completely during the time of Jesus, because that was the Bible, the books of the New Testament were written 40, 50 years after the death of Christ. So we're really talking about a perspective on Christ that has already gone through all kinds of interpretations and reinterpretations. So that is the starting point of theology. Other questions?
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome. So let me continue.
Father.
Yes. Yes, Al.
I just wondering, because since a while ago we talked about method as an introduction. Is this method is sometimes contradict to the symbol? For instance, in contextualization, as one example, there is in the European context when Jesus said, "I am the bread of life." We understood that bread is the European context. What about when we talk about contextualization symbol? If you call that, you take the context in the Philippines when we say about, "I am the rice of life."
Mhm.
So that's why I said sometimes this method is contradict to this some symbols, something like that, in theological aspect.
It's not so much contradicting the symbol, it's
Yeah.
making it more meaningful to your audience.
Okay.
Okay. But if you say, "I am the rice of life," you remember that Jesus did never said, "I am the rice of life."
Yeah. Yeah, but Father, I'm talking about Philippine setting, because rice is our,
I
rice
know,
is
but
our,
you see,
yeah.
okay, it's now the way what we would call inculturate, the way you would inculturate the symbols. Okay, there are some people who say it's a dynamic what do you call this, inculturation that has to take place. But we need to be careful also, because when we say, "I am the bread of life," with the word bread is not just European. It's also, remember, Asian. The time of Jesus, Jesus was an Asian basically, but that is the staple food at that time, the bread of life. So when you say, "I
Mhm.
am the rice of life," you may be understood by the Japanese, by the Koreans, by the Asians, but what is this? Even that is not. Uh, when you say I am the rice of life, how important is rice there?
Some
Sometimes
Asian rice is important.
yes, but if you go to China, China is
Yeah.
divided into two: the rice eating part and the noodle eating part,
Yeah.
the wheat eating part, the bread eating part. So again, of course, China has 2 billion population, so 1 billion the rice eating, the other
Yeah.
billion, right? But anyway, we're here talking about dynamic, what do you call this, transposition of an idea in a given context into our own context, which is the
Yeah.
whole matter of inculturation or contextualization, which is a very difficult matter because you have to even here in the Philippines, when you start talking about inculturating in our local language, you know how much we fight with one another in terms of language. Which language are you talking about? Which one is the Filipino language? Tagalog or Bisaya? I would say it's Bicol. It's not Tagalog. Why? Because I'm a Bicolano, so I would say Bicol. So, then what are we talking about? But the Filipinistas, the Tagalog people will say, "Oh no, Filipino is Tagalog. Is Tagalog is the Filipino." Okay, we can fight until kingdom come, but we will never be able to resolve it. Okay, that's a point that's best taken up, I think, in the matter of inculturation. But here we're trying simply talking about methodology. Definitely, our methodology is going to be contextualization or inculturation, but it's more than just transposition of symbols. One of the hardest places where we need to inculturate and to contextualize is in the liturgy, in the use of symbols
Mhm.
that we use, because not all our symbols would have the same kind of meaning. Okay, all right. So when you say Jesus is the Son of God, can we also say Jesus is the daughter of God
Doctor.
because you are talking to women? No, because he's the Son
No.
of God. It's not. So in a certain way, you cannot just what do you call this? You cannot. That's why you have to balance between what is a tradition and what is your own experience
Yeah.
today. The balance, the balance.
Another observation only. The color of Jesus, the skin. He's not white. He's not. He's a color. It's not because the what you can see in the crucifix now. White color is a European all that, but I think Jesus is Asian.
Well, we
Maybe
also
tan or dark, lighter.
you
Yeah.
can say Chinese, but they're also white.
Yeah, something like that. Because we have to follow the method of the church about the color. So
But I can show you. I have a cross here in my what is this in my room, and I collect crucifixes, by the way, but they come from different countries and they're all very different or
yeah.
different. The big one that I have here is black. He's black. Why? Because it comes from Africa. That's why I use it.
we
So
should uh we should could that do a Filipino color of the crucifix, something like
just like you would like the Blessed Mother to wear a patadyong, no?
that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
for an observation, Father. Thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay. Let me continue with the rest of the class. Okay. All right. So this is what we're going to take up in chapter 4, the movement from apologetic to fundamental theology and the methodology of see, judge, and act, and post-colonial liberative methodology. Okay. If you talk about inculturation, this is exactly what we're talking about. We are moving away from a colonial perspective. In the colonial perspective, all of that has to do with the what color of Jesus, about the bread. Those are colonial symbolisms, which they're not necessarily wrong, but they have a place to say. The main point is, how do you want the theology or sacraments to be meaningful to people to whom we talk or for us? Okay. Now, these sections I will be asking you to read some of the readings. I already indicated that in our course calendar. So the references that I would like you to use, no, not what I would like to use, but if you need to read more, you can read these two references. They are both from the Dictionary of Fundamental Theology. One is written by Latourelle. Well, the two are the co-editors of the book itself, talking about the history of apologetics and the fundamental theology. The same thing with Reno Fisichella. By the way, I had made a mistake there in terms of the reference of the Reno Fisichella. It should include this reference, Method 2, Fundamental Theology, because there's a Method 1, which was written not by Reno Fisichella, but by Enzio Poggio. What is this? But it has to do with systematic theology. We will take that up when we go to systematic theology, which is the part 3 of this course. Okay, so references for your references. Now, fundamental theology as a type of theology is relatively new in the sense that it is a kind of a discipline, or it's a way of doing theology that has really, what do you call this, been, that has come about, that has arisen precisely in the context of apologetic and the reform, in the movement to reform apologetical theology. So it grew out of several theological treatises in what is called the manual theology or the textbook theology. There's a treatise there on revelation, De Revelatione, De Fidet Revelatione, so faith and revelation, or the Ecclesia Christi, or on the Church of Christ. So these are the two treatises that are taken up in manual theology. In some instances, these are two different courses. There's one on revelation and faith, and there's another course on the church or ecclesiology. We call it ecclesiology. But this kind of manual theology soon evolved into apologetical theology. In other words, the two matter, revelation and the idea of the church, became now fused together because that is the subject matter and content of what is called apologetical theology. So I will tell you what apologetical theology, a little bit more, what do you call this, deeper than what we have taken up in the history of theology. What are the principal concerns of, or areas of interest of apologetical theology? Revelation and faith, and the church. But the church, precisely as when we talk about the church here, we talk about the pre-Vatican II idea of the church, basically the Roman Catholic Church. But the church here as the guardian of both revelation and faith. In other words, it is the church that is able to say, this is revelation, this is not revelation. This is what you have to do as an act of faith. This one doesn't constitute an act of faith. That is what the church does. So basically, that is the area of concern of apologetical theology, trying to guard the faith, what we call the deposit of faith in the church. This was also called apologetical theology, also could be called the classicist theology or the controversial theology. Controversial theology here is, what is meant there is that these are the matters that are being debated, or the matters that are the source of controversies. In other words, counter arguments, counter points, the ones that are being debated. That's why it's called controversial, because it comes from the word controversy, or in Latin, the controversies. In other words, about the controversial things, those things that are being debated, or that need some proof or some arguments. Okay. So apologetical theology's context. What is the context of apologetical theology? Apologetical theology, of course, grew out of the time and period in church history when, first of all, rationalism, in other words, the the uh, the predominance of reason as a way of knowing was becoming more and more widespread all over the world, because it was the period of the Enlightenment, both the early Enlightenment in the time of Descartes as well as the later Enlightenment in the time of Kant, Immanuel Kant. So that was one part of the context. From the philosophical or from the intellectual point of view, the context would be rationalism. The church was trying to argue against the rationalists. And then that is why, this apologetical theology was called polemical. Polemical here is basically, polemics is basically debating. You are debating, you are arguing with one another. The polemical or controversial kind of a theology. So that is one of the aspect of the context. The rationalist, idea of people, of philosophers especially, meaning that they are saying that the revelation that the church claims it has a corner it has a corner on revelation. Rationalists would say no. Anyway, those are nice. Those are things from your own your own faith tradition. But if you subject those ideas, your beliefs, into the to reason, the analysis of reason or a rational analysis, then some of those things that you would find in your beliefs cannot be supported, cannot be explained in a rational way. So you'll have to explain it in some other way. And I may not even agree with you. That would be the rationalist speaking. You can have to explain it in a different way. Otherwise, I will not argue. And if I do not argue, then I would say you do not have a credibility as far as human science is concerned. Okay? So rationalism is a very important context in apologetical theology. But especially when you started talking about a kind of rationalism that already tried to liberate itself from religion, anything that has to do with faith. In other words, a rationalism that became almost atheistic. It doesn't include anymore the idea of God. So the church felt the need to defend itself, to defend its own, its own teachings, and to be able to say that we can explain our teachings in a rational way. We can give you reasons for why we believe. So somebody better turn off something there, because we are hearing we're hearing some noise from someone there. Okay, so the context is, on the one hand, rationalism, and the other context is lack of belief or atheism, or the questioning of anything that has to do with faith, anything that has to do with religion. That's the other part. And so the church felt the need to defend itself. And so they came up with apologetical theology. Okay. Now, how did the church go about it? How did apologetical theology undertake proving these things? First, they speak about two ways of proving them. They would get some proofs from the text, from the Bible, from the scriptures, or from church tradition, from teaching. The problem, of course, with these proofs is that if you are arguing with rationalists, they would say, well, that is your own tradition. I don't believe in your tradition, so you cannot convince me. So that may not be as effective in trying to prove your point. So then the church would say, there is another way of proving it. I can prove it to you by argument, by a kind of a rational syllogism. So I will be able to show to you that what we have what we hold as our teaching, as the matter of faith, is something that is not only credible, but it is something that can be rationalized. In other words, explained by reason. Now, these are the teachings that we have, and the church has been the institution that has been, founded by Christ to guarantee the truths of revelation. And of course, to guarantee that the people are able to respond in proper faith, in authentic faith. So the method of the apologetical theology would be to say that, okay, these are truths that we hold as important, as decisive in our religion, precisely because Christ, the founder of the church, has given them to us. Okay, that's one way of doing that. Now, the problem with this, of course, we will see other problems. One problem is that when we subject these proofs to historical critical analysis, they are not as solid as sometimes we think. Because developing at this time also was the critical study of the Bible. Meaning to say, people were talking about the historicity of the Bible. Did the things in the Bible, the things that are narrated in the Bible, did they really happen? When they say really happen, you're talking about a historical certainty. Did it happen in the same way that you and I are alive today? We are historical persons. Did those things that the Bible speak about, did they really happen? Did Jesus Christ happen? Did he really die? Did Paul and the apostles really happen? Can you prove to me how they were? Now, at this time, in the history of biblical historical criticism, the church wasn't able to produce those studies yet, because, well, a lot of it is that we were simply handing it on by word of mouth, or even by something written. But you have to understand that the Bible was not proliferated or did not become commonplace until the time of the invention of the printing press in 1492 or 1490s, in the 1490s, or 1480s. So it was only around this time when the Bible got to be produced in a popular way. In other words, that the people are able to read the Bible. And because they were able to read the Bible then, because the Protestants had access to the Bible more earlier than the Catholics, then they were able to study it a little bit more. And then eventually, in light of rationalism, in light of the Enlightenment, they were able to question some of the things that were written about in the Bible. For example, the creation. Did the creation happen only in 7 days, or are we talking about something metaphorical? Nowadays, of course, we think of it as metaphorical, but at that time, in the 1800s, the late 1800s, that is yet not the way they were thinking. So apologetical theology was basically theology that is defensive. It tries to defend the teachings of the church and tries to prove that what we have is worth our faith, and that because they can also be explained by reason. Okay. An example of apologetical presentation. The matter for discussion is this: the Roman Catholic Church has the authority to teach in an infallible way. How are you going to explain that if you are confronted with rationalists or with Protestants or with with atheists? How are you going to explain that? Again, the context is the Protestants denying the authority of the Roman Catholic Church because of the many abuses in it, as Luther himself had found or explained. So the apologetical proofs that they would present would be: the church has the 4 marks of the true church: 1, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church is the only legitimate successor to the church founded by Christ. Emphasize here, legitimate, because the Protestants at that time were not considered by the Catholics as legitimate successor of the church. So the church would say the Roman Catholic Church is the only legitimate successor to the church founded by Christ. Therefore, the Roman Catholic Church teaches in an infallible way. So you can see the proofs. And if you are studying apologetics for the first time, you will say, oh, very good argument. But right there, you can already see the church has the 4 marks of the true church: one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. Where do you find those 4 marks? Anybody? Where do you find those 4 marks?
Usually, Father, when we engage into Paul speaking, Father.
Yeah.
Usually, when we are engaged into discussion, we usually use the Bible to prove the 4 marks of the church. Number 1, Matthew 16, verse 18. The church founded by Christ is only one. When he said that upon this rock I will build my church. He did not use the word churches. So definitely what he founded is only one church. He also used Ephesians chapter 4 verse 4. One faith, one baptism, to prove that it is one. In holy, of course, it is founded by God. It is founded by Jesus Christ. Therefore, it is also holy. And of course, we also sometimes connect it to the communion of the saints, the suffering church, the militant church, and the triumphant church. And there are members of the church that already sharing the divinity of God in heaven. So it is holy. Catholic because it already spread all throughout the world. Romans chapter 1 verse 8. And apostolic because of Matthew 28 verse 19 to 20. And of course, Matthew 16 verse 18 to 19. Yung, I will give you the keys of heavens. So we use that, usually we use that those biblical proofs in proving that the true church is the Roman Catholic Church founded by Christ. That's it, Father.
Okay, I'm glad we have an apologetical person here telling us what apologetical theology is. Okay, all right. You have cited some biblical verses from the New Testament. Now, one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The reason we say it is one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church is because that is what is stated in the
Apostles' Creed, Father.
Yes, in the creed. Basically, that is what we show in the creed. Okay, but in the creed, that is what we try to use in order to prove that the Catholic Church is the true church because it is one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Okay, you have given me biblical passages, Now, what is the context of those biblical passages? Are they really, was the context really trying to prove that Christ founded a church? Or was it something else? And this is the most important point when we use biblical text, because we are using biblical text to prove a point. But we are not, are we not in danger of taking those biblical passages out of their own context? And even, for example, we talk about the Matthew, the passage about about Peter himself. He said, I found the church upon you. And you said something about not churches, but church. Okay. But what is the meaning of ecclesia when Jesus was talking to Paul at that time? Was he talking about the Roman Catholic Church that we're talking about now? Or was he talking about something else? Or was the whole context of that passage, was it really talking about the primacy of Peter or the importance of Peter among the apostles? Or is he talking about the church? He's talking about the primacy of Peter or the role of Peter. So, in other words, the historical study of the biblical text now is very important because we could very easily be lifting those texts to prove our point, but we're lifting them out of context to prove our point. I am not saying that for the church to say we are one Holy Catholic. We are Holy Catholic, but we have to look for it in terms of proper understanding of it in the history. Now, one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, remember, as found in the New Testament, in the Nicene Creed, happened in 325 and 381. That's already almost 400 years after Christ. So when you try to use your proofs all the way to the time of Christ, when in fact that particular expression, one Holy Catholic and Apostolic, was something that was codified by the church only 300, 400 years afterwards, then we are really using a particular passage to fit our own argument. You see? That is the difficulty that people have about apologetical proofs. Because we have proofs, very beautiful proofs, but then when you examine the real context of those passages, you find that you are not able to defend. Because what you have done is simply, and this is what is being done by a lot of fundamentalists, by the way, not just in the Catholic Church, but in the Protestants, they will give you all kinds of quotations. They are all very good in quoting all kinds of texts. But are they quoting them in the right context, or are they quoting them in the proper context, or in the wrong context? More often than not, it is always it's always lifting it from out of its context, because you are proving a point. You're proving a point. There are other ways of proving why the Catholic Church is the true church. There are other ways of doing it. I can tell you there are other ways of doing it, and it is much better than this kind of apologetical. Let me continue then. So this is an example of an apologetical presentation. It's basically talking about something, but you can already see that as you develop your teaching, the primary aim there is, I want to convince you unbeliever. I want to convince you that this is what we are saying is something that is truly founded on the Bible and that can be explained reasonably. Okay, let me go to another example. Revelation is supernatural, with the implication that the church, as guardian of this revelation, is superior to others. Remember, we talk about apologetical theology, basically talking about revelation faith and also about the church. So what is the context of it? Again, the debate between the rationalists and the religious, people who do not believe about supernatural. But the church says there is a supernatural, and revelation is that supernatural thing. What apologetical proofs did we offer? External proofs and the internal proofs. What is the external proof? Miracles and prophecies. They are signs that revelation is no ordinary matter. It's not like what we see every day in our life. Those are revelations, are things that happen, and sometimes we don't know how to explain them. External signs. Internal proofs. These miracles and prophecies, as we have witnessed it in the New Testament, as we read about them in the New Testament, this precisely is what makes it so different from others, makes it so sublime, so different. So we're actually superior. Our idea is superior to what the rationalists would say. Okay, now what we are emphasizing here, again, I am not saying that this is wrong. I'm not saying that I disagree with the idea that revelation is supernatural. I agree with it, but I don't agree with the proofs. You can prove it in a different way. Okay. In other words, because when you start talking about miracles and prophecies as your own proofs that religion has to do with supernatural revelation, then again, what is the real meaning of miracles and prophecies in the context of the Old Testament, in the context of the New Testament? Miracles are always signs of God's revelation to us. And this is always what is sometimes claimed by us. Because it is revelation, therefore we cannot understand all of it, because it is a mystery. Okay. And then the rationalists will easily question, if it is a revelation and you cannot understand it, then it is not a revelation. Because the purpose of revealing is you want to make the other person understand it. If the other person cannot understand it, how can you consider it revelation? To whom is it being revealed? You would say, to only to the people who will have faith. Oh, so it's necessary to believe first before you can accept that something is revealed. So which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? So that I'm trying to put it in the context of the rationalist. So which one comes first, the faith or the revelation? Okay. Now, I already mentioned this. Okay. Our focus here is on the method itself. We're talking about a method, the theological method of apologetics. We're talking about the apologetical method. We have found that the apologetical method has a lot of loopholes that we can easily correct. Now, as I told you already about the miracles and the prophecies. And the prophecies, for example, we used to speak about prophecies as being able to foretell the future things. That is not even the reason of prophecies in what they call this in the New Testament. Prophecy is a warning. It's a warning. It's a way of warning people, not simply what do you call this? What is this? Prophesying that I can tell the what's going to happen in the future. I'm just simply telling you, warning you. But warning in the time of the Old Testament, warning is always in the context of what is going to make them listen to you. And sometimes by using the language of the prophets, which is a very shocking kind of a language, it's probably the best way of trying to get the attention of the Israelites, of the Jewish people, because they were so hard-headed, they would not listen to anything less than that. Anyway, okay. So I like to make to show you a critique of apologetical theology. As a method, it is a quasi-objective apologetics based only on metaphysical arguments and unrelated to the believing subject. If you look at the what do you call this, at the argumentation of apologetics, it can be an argumentation that can be made by a European, by a Filipino, by an African, by a Latin American. It doesn't make a difference who is the one saying it. So in other words, it purports to be a quasi-objective apologetics. Now, if you look at what happens in the New Testament, everything that Jesus reveals, or well, most of everything that Jesus reveals, can be understood by people. And that is precisely why they were able to make an act of faith, because they were able to understand that behind what Jesus was doing was the hand of God. There was something there about Jesus that made them say, I believe. Now, do you believe that I can heal you? The blind man says, I do. Now be healed. You are healed. So where did that faith come from? Now, it's very important that the revelation interacts with the subject. But when you look at revelation simply as an objective reality that took place, and you can argue with it in a rational way, then people say, there is something missing there. There's something missing, and that is the relevance to the believing subject. It also fails to show the historicity of the data. And sometimes, as we say, as I told you, data from the Bible, what do you call this? We sometimes take verses from the Bible and then just use it for our own argument. And that is what we have been taught by some, or sometimes that is what we have found other people. And then we think that because they are able to quote these passages from the Bible, that they are experts, that they know what they're talking about. Okay, well, maybe. But if they are confronted with people who know a little bit more about the Bible and who can argue with them and analyze with them about the real context of a particular passage, then that is the problem. That's the problem. Historical critical analysis of the Bible is a very, very difficult what do you call this? undertaking. Does not contextualize its content. So when we talk about revelation or the church as one holy, Catholic, and apostolic, uh, how do I contextualize it in my own time, in my own place? Where is it one? How are we talking about one? When we talk about one, where is the oneness? When we talk about holiness, how come we have all kinds of problems now with the clergy? Holiness? Is it really holy? Oh, but it's a church that is holy. Who belongs to the church? The priests? The people? So if only the holy ones belong to the church, then what happens to the idea of reconciliation, the sacrament of penance, the idea of forgiveness of sins? What happened? Or is holiness only an ideal? Is it something that's an ideal? And that's what is probably the more important critique about apologetical theology, is that there is a departure from the way the church fathers used to do theology, which all the church fathers always emphasized the connection between what was revealed as, let's say, the message of Jesus and how it applies to me, to us, to the community. And there's a very close connection with it, to such an extent that the actual or the end point is conversion. The end point is completely, believing in Jesus himself. That is the way of the church fathers. Or the scholastics, like Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, following Aristotle, was very careful that the subject is not forgotten. The subject, that's why the subject, when you talk about the Aristotelian philosophy in distinction to the Augustinian or the Neoplatonic philosophy, Augustinian philosophy is much more realistic because it is talking about the subject as well as the object, but they come together as in a kind of a mental concept. Okay, now so Thomas Aquinas would safeguard the integrity of the human subject. You remember the expression that he took from Aristotle: quid recipitur ad bodum recipientis recipitur. Whatever is received according to the mode of the recipient. So if I receive a revelation, if I receive a teaching, I am going to receive it according to my ability to receive it. So myself as a subject receiving revelation is important because I am the receptacle of revelation. So whatever that revelation is going to be, the way it's going to be understood, will be understood according to my ability to understand it. I am not saying that now the revelation is frozen in my own personal understanding. No. It's just that the way you accept revelation is the way. It's like the way you look at reality. How do you look at reality? With your own two eyes. If you have two different eyes, you think you would look at reality the same way? Probably not. As we have seen, among ourselves, there are 20 plus of us. We look at reality in different ways. But is it still the same reality? More or less it's the same because we agree. We agree that it's the same reality. But, each one of us, we have our own context. I come from this particular place, this own culture, from this particular family, speaking this kind of a language. That is the way I am going to understand, to receive, recipientis, receive what is the revelation. I cannot do anything about it. That's who I am. That's who I am. So that sometimes this is what happens with apologetical theology. You don't seem to make me understand what I need to believe, but in the way that I will be able to I will be led to believe what you want me to believe. Another critique of theology was, in fact, when you start talking about these arguments, the proofs, you in fact see a complete separation of faith and reason. On the one hand, there are the beliefs, what we call the supernatural, and on the other hand, you have the natural. The supernatural, they are revealed to us, but we cannot comprehend it completely. The natural, we can use the reason in order to prove about the supernatural. When in fact, what has happened there is that we are now trying to prove the supernatural, what do you call this, matter in a natural matter using reason, and saying that that is credible, that is understandable, because it can be explained by reason. Now, when we do that, we're actually saying that, wow, now reason has the rationalist has won us over, because now we are explaining things by reason. In other words, they are right in a way, because what they are saying is that if the supernatural cannot be explained by reason, then it is not worth what do you call this, believing in. But if you say that it can be explained by reason, then what is the difference between our supernatural and actually the what people call superstition? I mean, things that I just believe because I just want to believe. Okay, the content of faith was proven by reason alone, and then another more important critique was moving away from the true content of revelation. So we use this text, biblical text, and trying to prove our point. But did we understand what Jesus was talking about during those instances? Was he really talking about the Roman Catholic Church, the way we have now? Apostolic, for example, we say we are the successors of the apostles. So there are only 12 apostles. Are we going to have 12 bishops only? So what is the meaning of succession of apostles? There is a better way of explaining it. And the better way of explaining it is historical development. That is the way it developed. Okay. Anyway, we'll do that later. We go to chapter 6. Yeah. Okay. Then we stressed so much defending the church, of course, and the beliefs of the church, that sometimes we're not clear on our perception of Christ, or we defend sometimes on the subject itself, the ability of the subject to explain rationally what is the experience. And what do you call it, to the detriment of the objectivity and universality of the content. Now, it's already time. Let me close here, because we don't want to go beyond. I'll be talking about what they're moving from apologetical theology to fundamental theology. I know you probably have some questions about apologetical theology. We can bring that up tomorrow. But I will be discussing fundamental theology next class, as well as as well as the See Judge Act process. How many of you are familiar with the See Judge Act process?